Hello everyone, and welcome to video number 8 in our online learning series. We're going to be continuing with our discussion of comparative poetry. And as you know, for those of you who've watched the first and second video in this mini series on comparative poetry, we've been looking at Piano by D.H. Lawrence and Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden and analyzing them in terms of the poem itself. So we haven't been comparing them yet, and this is what we're going to get into in our discussion today. So the first thing we need to do is we need to recall the poet background information that we dug up for both of our poets, because this is going to help assist us in terms of understanding where each poet is coming from and if perhaps they have some similarities that we need to be aware of in terms of their background, or if there are such stark differences between them that these differences might help enlighten us in terms of what we're looking for in comparing and contrasting them. So the first thing I'm going to do is remind myself of their individual backgrounds. So in Piano, we have the poet D.H. Lawrence, who is an English poet and who lived much of his life at the turn of the century, the 20th century, that is. And then we switch over to our second poet, Robert Hayden, an American poet who spent much of his life growing up in a United States characterized by racial discrimination and segregation, but also that he would have lived through that civil rights movement as well. The next thing I do is turn my focus to what sort of topics they usually discuss in their poetry. So you'll recall that Lawrence tended to focus on things that were controversial in terms of discussing them as a wider population, things about human experience and emotion that were very private and personal, but also that he had this strong connection to his mother, and we see that revealed in the poem Piano. Then I turn to Robert Hayden and the things that he typically discussed, and he would take his personal experience and mold that with his knowledge of African American history, but also that he had a very depressing childhood growing up. I went into his backstory a little bit in our last video together, and we see this negative childhood appearing in the way he chooses to discuss it in Those Winter Sundays. My next step in comparative poetry then was to individually analyze these poems, and that's what we covered in videos number 6 and 7. So just a reminder, the same central topic appeared in both of these poems, so this idea of talking about childhood memories. But whereas Lawrence refers to these memories in a nostalgic and happy way, we see that Hayden refers to these memories in a sorrowful way, even regretful. And this is important to understand because the way in which the attitude towards the topic is revealed, i.e. the tone of my speaker, is going to help reiterate and reveal the theme of each poem. I saw the theme in Piano was this irreplaceable nature of childhood, that we should enjoy and appreciate our childhood while we still can. Whereas in Those Winter Sundays, the theme was clearly this idea of appreciating parental sacrifice and understanding this complex nature that exists in terms of our relationship with our parents and their relationship with us. The next thing we looked at were key literary devices, and I'm underlining the word key here to reiterate that it's not that I need to go on an Easter egg hunt for every single literary device that I find. I'm looking for the ones that most clearly reveal the theme to me. And this is going to be important when I move into trying to put this analysis on paper in terms of an essay, because I don't want to overwhelm myself with too many literary devices that I can't see the clearer picture. So here I notice in Piano that the sound devices being used are alliteration, sibilance, and onomatopoeia. I see in Those Winter Sundays there's a similarity in terms of using alliteration, but now we see that Hayden, instead of using sibilance or onomatopoeia, makes use of consonants. I then turn to figurative language, and I notice that both of these poems are going to make use of imagery. But where in Piano we see symbolism being used, in Those Winter Sundays we see personification and this repetition and rhetorical question being used by Hayden. And both of these sets of literary devices are then going to be used to communicate that tone and impact the mood of the poem, the feeling that I as the reader get as I go through it. Then we come to our next step in comparative poetry, and this is going to be the focus of this video. So now I'm taking the analysis individually that I've done for each of this these poems, and I'm going to now compare them side by side. So I encourage you, for those of you who have been taking notes, just as you see I've placed on the screen, get those two sets of notes side by side and walk through your notes with me in the video as I walk through mine, so you can begin to see this process of comparing and contrasting these poems in terms of not just their theme, but how they communicate their theme. So I'm going to go through 3 questions in conducting comparative analysis. And the first question is this: what do I notice about the topics discussed and the themes derived? So this is the easiest question, and it's the broadest question. You'll see that just as we need to come at a prompt, for example, looking at it broadly and then coming to be more specific in terms of the way we analyze, right? You always start with your topic sentence, and then the main idea, and then the evidence, and then the analysis. This thought process of going from broader to more specific is continued here. So I'm starting very broad in terms of the topic and the theme that I see. So I'm going to look at the fact that they have a common topic. They share this discussion of childhood memories, but the themes are very different. Whereas Lawrence is going to talk about this irreplaceable nature of childhood, a theme that I've derived because I understand that he has warm and nostalgic feelings towards childhood. Hayden is going to talk about the complexity of his relationship with his father, a theme that I'm able to derive or understand because he has a sorrowful attitude towards discussing his childhood. So while I see that they have the same topic, they are divergent or different in their viewpoint on this topic. And as a result, I'm going to have different themes. And it's really important that I understand this difference, where they begin to separate from one another, because this is going to then shape the rest of my discussion, as you'll see with our second question. I come then to question number 2. What do I notice about how each poet communicates their theme? So remember, I'm not just concerned with what they are saying, but how they choose to say it. And I'm going to break these down poem by poem and then come back and draw them together, because this will help me better understand exactly how each poet is speaking. So in theme number 1 for piano, I have this understanding that childhood is irreplaceable and I should hold on to those memories as often as I can, and that this is the theme I understand because the poet is so nostalgic and joyful in thinking about his childhood, at least so far in his being in the midst of that memory, right? So I look first at the sound devices he used, and we talked in this last video that he uses these specific sound devices to create this light and upbeat mood, because this is going to reflect the light and upbeat mood he has when he's in the midst of his childhood. However, this is also going to stand in contrast to the overall tone that the poem takes on, because remember, by the end of the poem, he's not looking at his childhood fully in the midst of being joyful. He also is a bit sad towards the end because he realizes he can never have those memories back. So although these sound devices create that light, happy mood, it stands in contrast to the overall tone of the poem. I look then at figurative language, and I see that the overall effect of his use of imagery and symbolism, for example, helps to fully immerse me as the reader into his childhood, so I should be able to fully understand that it was a happy and joyous one, hence why he's so sad and comprehending that he can never relive those moments. They're gone. I then repeat this process by looking at my second poem, Those Winter Sundays. So I look back at that theme and I remember that Hayden is trying to communicate the complexity of his relationship with his father. And I look first at the sound devices that he uses, alliteration and consonants. And I see the effect that they have on the poem is to create this light and upbeat mood, meaning as I read the lines and verses aloud, I begin to feel uplifted in my mood because of the beat that's made. And this is interesting because it stands in complete and utter contrast to the overall tone of the poem. So the same or similar effect that I see in piano, But now it's even more intense because there isn't a happy and joyful mood to feel in the first place. I'm only made to feel that way because Hayden wants to exemplify for me how childhood should be happy. I should have those feelings I get when I read that poem aloud. But the reality was for him, it wasn't to be so happy for him, at least. Then I look to figurative language, and I see that, again, Hayden also makes use of imagery, but he's going to utilize personification, repetition, and rhetorical question. And he does this, one, to fully immerse me into his childhood. But now I'm being immersed so I fully understand how fearful his child was, or his childhood, rather. So although he's secure in his physical needs, right? His father makes the home warm for him. He polishes his shoes for him. He never feels that emotional security that he longs for. So I look then, and what sort of takeaways do I understand? I understand from the first poem that my tone is very nostalgic, and he reminds us that he has a good childhood, but the pain comes in not in the childhood itself, but understanding that he cannot have it back. And this is, again, going to impact the mood of the poem. So my mood as the reader is going to shift along with the tone of the speaker. And it's going to shift because I need to also consider my childhood and understand that those happy memories, I can never have them back. I'm going to then look at the tone for those winter Sundays, and I see that this tone is sorrowful, and that's because the poet is acknowledging the complex nature of his relationship with his father, and the fact that when he was a boy, he really couldn't understand that his father's actions did reveal love, just not in the way that he wanted. And this is going to impact the mood because just as I see with piano, the mood of the reader is going to shift along with the tone of the speaker. And perhaps the speaker then is trying to get me to also understand the complexity of my relationship with my parents and evaluating that. I then turn to my third question. What significant similarities and differences do I notice? So I'm going to first talk about the similarities. And I see that there's the use of sound device to help create a mood that doesn't really entirely fit with my subject. And I understand that because through these sound devices, the speaker is going to reveal a tone that's complex in terms of looking at memories of the past. So complex in piano in that while he had a happy childhood, he understands that he can never get these moments back. And complex in those winter Sundays because our speaker understands that really his father was trying to show him love the whole time. Again, just not the type of love that he wanted. I also see that they use imagery to fully immerse the reader into their childhood. So in looking at both of these poems, I should not be confused as to how they viewed their childhood and what their childhood would have looked like, because through imagery, I experience it with them. I'm then going to turn to my differences, and I see the first difference in their perspective or their view on their childhood. So while Lawrence wants to relive his childhood, Hayden feels regret in the way that he treated his father. But, interestingly enough, he shows no desire to go back to his childhood. And additionally, I see that while Lawrence views his home as a happy one, Hayden identifies for us the miserable and even fearful childhood home he had. I also see that they utilize different literary devices to communicate this reality. So again, while they share imagery to show the childhood picture they use these different literary devices to communicate the depth of that image. I also see that they utilize different literary devices to reveal how they now view their childhood. So looking back in retrospect, we see that Lawrence makes use of that metaphor towards the end, right, of his longing to cast off his manhood or his adulthood in order to be fully re-immersed in the past, something he cannot have. Whereas Hayden uses this constant question of what did I know? What did I know? Revealing to us as the reader that he looks back on his childhood with some form of regret, not because he wants to relive it, but because he realizes that his father was trying to show him love all along. Then I move into tying it all together, and this is where we get to completing a comparative poetry essay. And the first thing that I need to do then is look at the prompt that I'm given. And so when we're looking at two or more poems and we're trying to compare and contrast them, one of the central things you might be asked to look at is the speaker's attitude towards what they're discussing, right? Their tone. So here in this prompt, you're asked to compare and contrast the speaker's attitude toward their childhood in Piano and Those Winter Sundays. And the first thing I need to do is to look at the theme that I've derived from each of these, because this theme, as we saw through our analysis, is linked directly to the speaker's attitude, their tone towards the topic. And I use that to make an overall claim. So if I was writing an essay on the prompt above, a claim that I might make could be something like this. While each speaker recognizes the love their parent has for them, Lawrence feels nostalgic about his childhood, while Hayden shows a childhood characterized by fear. So I've begun by taking a stand in terms of what I view each speaker's attitude toward their childhood to be. That's my claim. But the next thing I need to do is to identify what reasons I have to believe what I do. And more often than not, the evidence that I'll use to support that claim, so i.e. to form my reasons, is going to be literary devices. And so I look back at the work I've done and seen what literary devices have been used. And I'm going to take those devices to then create my reasons. So, for example, if I want to support Lawrence's view, I might say something like this. Lawrence utilizes alliteration, onomatopoeia, and imagery to reveal his attitude. Remember, I identified way more literary devices than that, but I don't want to overwhelm myself in trying to analyze them, nor my reader in trying to comprehend my analysis. So I'm being very specific in how I choose them. Then I'm going to turn and try to support my view of Hayden's attitude, and I might say something like this. Hayden utilizes alliteration, imagery, and personification to reveal his attitude. So again, you can see that I've become very specific in terms of how I choose them. Then finally, I'm going to take my claim and my reason and use them to outline the rest of my essay. And for those of you who need a refresher, we've just completed an outline similar in video number 5 in our discussion of Shakespearean sonnets. So you can go there to review that. And I will post a sample essay on this prompt and poem set in particular within a week of posting this video. Thank you guys for watching. Here's a brief preview for video number 9. So we're going to move away from Piano and Those Winter Sundays, but we're still going to stay in our realm of discussing comparative poetry. And we're going to start with the second poem set. And this one is going to be focused not on childhood memories, but now on perspectives on death. And we're going to look at 2 poems in particular. Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, and Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. And I really want you guys to pay particular attention as we go through these next video sets, because I'm going to ask you to write our second essay on poetry discussing these 2 poems and their perspectives on death. Hence why I'm going to do a sample poem essay for you on Piano and Those Winter Sundays. That way you'll have time to review the outline video, time to look at my sample essay, and we would have completed our analysis together on both of the above poems prior to your due date for this second essay, which will be April the 6th. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.